I am Johanna Ulloa Giron. I am the Advocacy Program Manager for the Colorado Trust, and I'm a member of the Executive Committee for the Colorado Media Project. The Trust is very honored to be a sponsor in this convening today. And I also want to take a minute to ask all of you to help me thank both Melissa and Sam for organizing such an amazing convening today. We want to thank all the amazing speakers and panelists so far for a morning chock full of insights and inspirations. It is a real pleasure to introduce our next discussion, where community members will be sharing insights from a project that the Colorado Media Project has supported since late 2019 in partnership with the First Press and now the Colorado News Collaborative. New Voices, Colorado began as a series of facilitated conversations between Black journalists and Black community members in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the racial justice flashpoint of 2020. Since then, the Voices Initiative has grown to support working groups of Latinx journalists and community members and leaders from the Colorado, Indigenous, and Asian Pacific island communities, all to wrestle with one overarching question. What would it take to ensure that Colorado's local newsrooms and their coverage respects, reflects, reaches out to, and serves the state communities and the residents of color? We know that the answers are complex and as different as each community. And while building trust and momentum takes time, there is also a great sense of urgency. As the Black Voices and Latinx Voices working groups titled their working groups report last year, "The time is right now, and think big, act now." Each report lifted up 5 calls to actions, a step that newsrooms, community members, and funders can take to create a future with communities of color, share and shape the power of local news media. In sessions this morning, we heard both similar and unique calls to action from Asian American Pacific Islander journalists and community members, and Indigenous journalists and community members, and reports from these working groups are forthcoming as well. To support these calls to actions and catalyze experimentation and implementation, Colorado Media Project has committed to 3 years of funding for a grant opportunity we call Advancing Equity in Local News. In January 2022, CMP announced nearly $1 million in grants to support 25 projects aimed to advance equity in local news and strengthen newsrooms that serve diverse communities, many which are being featured at this convening. I'm excited to announce that next month, CMP will open applications for the second round of grant funding from our Advancing Equity in Local News funds, which is generally supported by the Colorado Trust, the Colorado Health Foundation, Gates Family Foundation, Bohemian Foundation, Democracy Fund, and administered to the Rose Community Foundation. It is my honor to introduce Tiya Griego, a veteran of the Rocky Mountain News, the Denver Post, the Washington Post, and now with the Colorado News Collaborative, to lead this conversation with community representatives from the Black, Latinx, Asian American and Pacific Islander, and Native and Indigenous Voices Initiative working groups, to spotlight their reports and recommendations for a more equitable, accessible, and just local media ecosystem in Colorado. Welcome, Tiya.
Thank you. Thank everyone who's here. I think it's been a fantastic morning. There's just been a lot of really intense, candid discussion, and I have a lot of things percolating in my head. Well, I'm going to focus on this stellar panel right now. I do want to thank the Colorado Media Project because it saw, like many of us, it saw a moment in which some kind of action was urgent. I want to thank Diamond Hardiman. Diamond, I know you're here. Will you stand up, please? Diamond Hardiman with Free Press helped seize this moment. I also want to thank Sylvia Solis, who is not here, but who is my COLab colleague, and she helped carry on this moment as she was in fact carrying her soon-to-be-born child. I'm very grateful for Sylvia, who helped organize the AAPI and Indigenous Voices conversations of this year. And of course, to the funders, this next round of funding is fantastic. It's great news. The funders are helping to make these recommendations, which I think they should be some preliminary recommendations and recommendations on your table. They're helping us to realize this moving forward. So I'm not going to do a detailed bio because we don't have that much time, and you can see their bios in your sched, but I will tell you that I just want you for a second to, before I forget, are there any other members of any of the Voices groups here? And if you are, can you stand up? Because of course, our deepest gratitude goes to these members of these 4 groups who have come in to do the work alongside Linda, journalists of color, community members and journalists of color working together on what is a really serious, long-standing issue of, you can call it rebuilding trust, it's probably more likely building trust. And I want you for one second just to imagine yourself really as any one of these members of the group, and think about this, that they committed themselves to this endeavor despite our very long history in local news and in media of stereotyping, sidelining, silencing the communities that are represented here. They did this despite an equally long history of knowing full well coming into this that our self-awareness around these issues as leaders of newsrooms, as organizations, as funders, our self-awareness flickers in, and then we have these moments that are kind of marked by self-flagellation in which we pledge we are going to do better, and we are going to have these conversations, and we are going to get things done. And then that moment, it passes, right? And then we settle into this another long period of the status. Did I go on?
Yeah, just use
Okay,
this.
thank you.
I think you have to turn it on.
Okay, so then we settle into this long period of status quo. So my first question for Tiya Trent from Black Voices, from Renee Hutchins, from Indigenous Voices, from Fran Campbell, from AAPI Voices, and from, well, we all know her as PBR, from Latinx Voices, is a really basic one, but a critical one, because despite all of this knowledge, you all chose to make a leap of faith, and you decided to commit to this process. So first question, and Tiya, I want to start with you, is why? What led you to go ahead and move forward?
Can you hear me?
I'm going to pass this down.
Here you go.
Thank you. Again, my name is Tiya Trent, and I am here representing myself, the community, and Project Voice as well. What inspired me to get involved was because I'm just tired of sitting on the sidelines and watching stuff happen and not happen in the correct way. I was thinking about this again this morning, and I was like, Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells fought for us to be able to tell our own stories, to be able to go out and find stories that are not only good, not only bad, but just tell a narrative of what's really happening in Black communities. And I just want them, I just want the media to start getting it right. We're tired of just being portrayed in certain ways. And that's really what inspired me, and thinking about youth, and how youth may be portrayed in media, and how we can support youth moving forward with media.
Thank you. We can just move on down the line.
Hello, Yat-e. My name is Renee. I'm a citizen of Navajo Nation. In my language, Yat-e means hello. Shi-e, dual shirine. This means welcome. It's good to be here. To answer that briefly, I'm here doing this work because of my ancestors. And it's hard not to get emotional about that because I'm here and I'm proud to be here. And you'll often see that narrative that we are still here as Indigenous people. Because I've had people who told me to my face, I thought you were extinct. And how did you get here? Yeah, it's a tough one to swallow. And it's one thing to fight racism, and it's another thing to fight the fact that people just don't even think you exist at all. Growing up as a child and now as an adult now, like it's a responsibility and an honor for me, really, that I feel like is handed to me from my ancestors, and the fight, the resistance and resilience that they had despite colonization, despite the history in our country towards Indigenous people. It meant a lot to be here, not only personally, but to my community. I see the ways that racism, discrimination, and the social injustices that we experience today, and how narratives are such a big part of, how can we push towards equity and disrupting those toxic narratives that erase and cause the Indigenous invisibility that we fight today. So, pass it on.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fran Campbell, and I am with the Asian Chamber of Commerce. I'm actually I'm born and raised here in Denver, and I think the reason that I wanted to do this is because this is my home. And for so many years, nobody knows our story. Nobody knows our story of my family, of the stories of the other Asian ethnic groups that have come here, and how diverse our community is, how interesting our community is. And, during COVID, I think is the most attention that our community has had in so long. It was a negative attention because of the anti-Asian hate. And I know that there was some workshops this morning around that. But like you all have said, there are great stories within our community, and I just want people to hear them. I want people to know what we're doing. I don't want to be the silent, invisible model minority anymore. So that's why I'm doing it.
My name is Patricia Barella Rivera. That's why they call me PBR, because my name is so long. But the reason I got involved was as a baby boomer, I was getting tired of just not seeing people like the four of us reflected anywhere. I'm from New Mexico, and we're like 8th or 9th generation from New Mexico. And, like all of these other three women, we're really proud of our culture, where we come from, and how we've been raised. But the problem is society has really not looked at us as being equals or have valued us in terms of our culture and what we bring to this country. All of us in this room, except for Native American people, they were the first Americans. The rest of us are immigrants. And we don't see that. And how, your community, because being from New Mexico, I know, it's sad, and I was just furious, and I thought, Patricia, speak up. And I've done it. I've done it now for the last 10 years, that I will write letters to NBC, CBS, ABC. I will call the TV stations, and I have a story about that, because I was fed up that they needed to see, our children need to see the role models. They need to see African Americans. They need to see Native Americans. They need to see Asian Americans. They need to see people from the gay community, people from the Hispanic community. And I really believe that if we're passionate enough, we can get things done as a group together, coming together. And I'm so glad when Tina called me and she says, Patricia, I'd like you to be a part. I says, well, I'm not a news reporter. I'm just probably an advocate, and probably a woman and a person that has seen enough that I'm tired of it. And I want to see change before I die. I've had a gutful. And let me tell you, I will not take no for an answer. I will not.
She won't.
I won't. So we need to make change. All of us in this room are change agents. And if you really want to do it, and I don't care what color you are, male or female, we've got to come together and say, how do we view the world when we read the newspaper, when we see it on television, look at newsletters, whatever. And so I am just adamant about doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep doing it.
So what
Speak up.
I'm sorry.
Go
so,
ahead, honey.
So what I'm hearing is that despite this history, there's still optimism that things can change. And so I want to ask, I have to put my glasses to ask this. So the goal of the working groups was to come up with ways toward more equitable, accessible, and just local news. So I'm wondering for each of you, what exactly does that look like? And I'm also wondering whether in the process of working, meeting with these working groups, whether your definition has changed at all. So what does equitable, accessible, and just local news look like?
Well, right now, it's getting a little bit better. It's not that great. But in terms of because I'm an action-oriented person. I mean, give me a strategic plan, tell me how to do it, and I'll go for it. Because I'm tired of people just sitting around and not doing a doggone thing. So I think what I learned in the sessions is it was great that I was able to hear, writers and people who are working in television, people who have newsletters, so on and so forth. I learned a lot about their own positions and what their roles and responsibilities really are. Because a lot of times we're in these silos that we don't know what each one of us does. Does that make sense? We hear it and we see it, but we don't know exactly what everyone is doing in their area. But one of the things that I want to see, I'm tired of talking. I'm tired of it. So because I don't have much longer to live, probably another good 20 years, but a lot more. But I just think, yes, you're right. There is optimism, but with a group like this, that's the only way we can do it, because I can't do it alone. And so for me, it's about action and words. No, we're done with the words. We want to see how many people you have in front of the camera, behind the camera, in the newsrooms, who are in the leadership teams, who the CEO is. I mean, we need to be up and down in terms of the entire structures. And that's how change is made.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think one of the most important things that I learned during our Voices session was the capacity of journalists, and that you guys don't always have enough time to learn about my community. You got to make that deadline. If there's a great story about my community, but something comes up that day, then my story's not going on. And I know that. And I don't think all of our community knows that. So that is where I can be a bridge to my community to let them know. On the other hand, though, I want to take this opportunity to tell all of you in the media that take your time also with us. There are so many stories. And the best way, if you've ever written a novel or even an essay, is you have to do research on your subject before you write or put anything on air. And I think if you give us patience, we will do that for you as well, so that we can tell you our stories and we can help you learn more about our community. So that is kind of the two-sided things that I've learned from Voices and that I hope to share with my community at large.
Trying to remember those 3 words.
I know. I was actually looking back.
Accessible,
accessible, and just.
equitable, and just. I'm definitely going to just bring home this message to say that we are well beyond broad brushstrokes, complicity. This is what we've seen for so long. People stay stuck in this idea of just getting together, strategic planning, and then it just stops. Where at what point in time do these words become actions? And for me, I would really put out the message that I would like to see the news and media take a intentional responsibility in educating themselves about Indigenous peoples. And when I say Indigenous peoples, I have to say that we all come from hundreds of distinct nations, and so that means that we're not this pan-Indigenous idea, and that's, for so long we've had our stories told for us and about us, but it's not by us, and I want to see that change. I look around. I've been in Colorado since about 2009, and as part of the working groups, that came up a lot in our sessions. You know, where do you get your news, and do you see yourself and you see Indigenous people in the news? And the answer is no, I don't. I don't see myself in anywhere represented. So this slogan idea of representation matters, you know, it's a great hashtag, but what does it really mean? You know, and I've even seen the slogan BIPOC, Indigenous people being erased. I can't tell you how many times I've been on panels or group or reviewing grantee stuff, and I ask people, like, you solicit applications, you solicit stories for a BIPOC, and not one Indigenous person was there at all in that group. So, you know, the erasure is still very much there, and I think it's important that. And in the earlier session today, I mentioned that many times Indigenous people make the news when it's Indigenous Peoples History Month or Native History Month or some kind of cultural event. And you know, I would like to see us highlighted in all aspects of modern life. You know, this is really important to connect the history, because you know, and one time I had a group look up. Just Google, you know, Native Americans, and what you see is a lot of antiquated black and white pictures. I want that to change. You know, I'm here, right here in front. You know, we have people that can take photos of us. You know, there's modern day representation. You know, and so to really connect that idea from history to present, and then finally, I would add that, and maybe this might come up later, but safe spaces. I can't tell you how many cease and desist letters I've received for speaking up and writing and doing journalism and telling a story, because some of the issues that we're tagged or tapped to do discuss racism and discrimination, and it's important to remember that comes at a high cost or high risk, I mean, to speak out and disrupt and be truth tellers. And so that's why it meant a lot to me to be a part of this group, because I knew what I was coming into. It was a joy. It was, in fact, the number one thing that came up in our sessions was healing. This was a healing space for so many of us that got together. So,
Thank you. I want to push back a little bit on when you were saying that journalists in their time, they need to make time. Plain and simple. If a story comes up and your story or our stories are supposed to be shown, then that's what needs to happen. Because what always happens is we get put in the background and we're done. We're done being put in the background, because a lot of our people have done so much for this country, right? And we get painted in such negative lights. So I would really like to push back. You can make the time. If you can make the time for other stories, you can make the time for our stories. I think accessible, equitable, and just. I would say we need a variety of voices, right? Sometimes you see us going to the same voices in different communities. Right? So that's kind of what you all think. That's the spokesperson for this community. So we really need some more voices to enter these conversations and the rooms. There has to be a way to get our youth involved. There has to be a way to get our youth involved, because we are not always going to be here. It is not up to us to lead this world. It is up to us to try to lead this world in a better place for them, but they're the ones that are going to be here doing the work, not us. Different stories, right? Don't always focus on the negative. You don't always have to focus on the good, right? There's going to be all kinds of stories that intersect, that overlap, right? There could be stories about Black and brown communities coming together. There could be stories about Asian American and Black communities coming together, Latino communities coming together. So it doesn't necessarily have to be siloed, right? There's power in numbers. I would also say programs to train like Black youth, right? And opportunities for them to get into media, to be able to learn how to use their words and to be able to get these stories out, right? Because I think sometimes as adults, we think we know everything and we don't listen to our youth. So I think we have to take time out to listen to our youth and figure out opportunities to get them in the room so we can hear their voices.
Did anyone want to bounce off that?
You know what, I just want to say something. That I was going to bring that up, and I wrote it down. Internships. That's where it's at, because you've got to grow your own. I mean, that's what it's all about. And every one of you in this room, I'm sure, has been mentored by somebody, right? So think about that. Think, if it just, and think about it in terms of diversity. I know a lot of you probably think, well, yeah, but we can't find them. Well, let me tell you, we're out there. And all you have to do is, get your human resource person in your company to start recruiting young people. I mean, our young people are hungry. They're hungry to learn. And you see that I'm very passionate because I'm a personnelist. And I know what it's like to get out and recruit people. And, I could tell you a lot of fun stories that when I was recruiting engineers, I worked for the U.S. Forest Service. We were recruiting engineers, and I needed to find more people of color and women. Well, I'd go into the bathrooms at the colleges, and I'd see the women's bathroom, and I'd see the engineering books line up. And so I would wait till they would come out of the stalls, and I recruited them. I know that sounds funny, but you got to do what you got to do. And you need to be creative and think out of the box.
All right, we'll add
That's
bathroom
enough.
stocking to the HR checklist. Tiya, I want to go back to something you said, because it is really difficult. It was even difficult in this process of figuring out who would be part of the working group, because it's, communities are dynamic, they are complex, they are complicated, and so even picking people was a fraught exercise, because we knew that the people we have represent some part of an experience of a community, and it was always important to keep that in mind as we have these conversations. And we learned along the way, as we structured these Voices conversations, again starting with Diamond and Black Voices, which was our smallest group, but Black Voices fed a kind of urgency throughout this entire process of how it should go. Latinx Voices was a little bit larger, and then with each iteration they've been slightly different as we've learned along the way what is the best way to truly engage members of a community, and again, journalists of color, to try to create change. So I want to ask each of you, and you may have touched a little bit on this, but in the actual sessions themselves, I would like to know, what were the things that inspired you? And Renee, you mentioned healing. But also, what were the things that frustrated you, or the obstacles that you saw ahead? And I would tell you to pull no punches, but I don't think that's really necessary. So, who would like to start?
Yeah, thank you. I think what frustrated me the most is the feeling of, here we go again. We're still doing this. And you mentioned that earlier, because we have been trying, I know my community has been trying to be more outspoken with the media and have the media cover us more equitably, but this is decades long. You know, the term model minority was started by a journalist. You know, that and that label, I think it came out like in a U.S. News and World Report in the 70s, was meant to kind of keep us quiet and get everybody else mad at us. And that's what it does, and it still does to this day. So understanding that we have been trying to do this for so long is very frustrating. But I do see hope because of all of the things that we have been doing with the journalists and media. So far, this has been the longest. So I am really hoping that there will be some life in this and sustainability in this.
I think for me, and again, we were, I think, the first group that started this, right? So I think that, and Diamond and I were just speaking about this, right? Like getting folks involved. My frustration, I guess, comes in of this name game, I guess, right? If people feel like they don't know who you are, they're not going to answer an email. They're not going to reach out. They're not going to ask for more information. And that's pretty frustrating, right? Because if we don't come together, how are we going to fix anything? How are we going to find solutions to problems? And so even as I look around the room, I'm frustrated, right? Because I don't see a lot of us in here. Right? Look. And so that's frustrating, right? Because there's power in numbers. If we don't have the numbers, what do, right? At one point, we have to step up. We have to step up. It's not going to be anybody else's job but our own, right? And so I think that really frustrates me of the name game, right? And of people not necessarily answering or reaching out because they don't know your name. But on the other hand, it was lovely to meet with everyone and to meet and see beautiful Black faces and like-minded folks that really wanted to make a change. And so that's why I'm still here and still sticking with it, because I think this is so important. It is so important, as frustrating as it is to get some of us in the room, it's still such an important thing. And so I will continue to fight.
I would say that the frustration is would definitely say, like, you know, as was mentioned, that here we go again. Like we're getting together, like I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, what are the barriers to X, Y, Z in Indigenous communities? It's for 2 decades, we keep having the same conversations, the why. And my fear is that we would spend this time coming together, having these critical conversations, but it would go nowhere. And that's why I feel like there is that urgency. I'm 40 years old, and I was teasing my mom the other day. I need several lifetimes to get what needs to be done, but I only have one, and so I'm gonna make the most of it. And that's why I'm dedicated. In a sense, people say, why do the work? And when I say I don't have a choice, it doesn't mean like I'm going to sit by the wayside, but I've been beat down so hard where I feel buried, because I'm the amount of hate speech, the racism, the fact that I end up in a lot of times bringing forth recommendations to, and I'm speaking to an mostly all white audience. I spoke in the first panel and mentioned that my other second language is Navajo, and the fact that I'm speaking English here is telling to the dominant colonial language that was imposed on Indigenous people. And so it's to be a communicator and a storyteller in this age is an extremely difficult challenge, because we come from so many nations, and as a Diné person, there's words in my language that I just feel like they just don't translate to English. And when I'm talking about words that that matter in terms of fighting for social justice issues or policy or change, I have to speak in English, and so it's you know, I know I'm getting a little bit away from that frustration. That the question was about frustration, and I think that's why I immediately, my reflection was that our time in our group was healing more than anything. We get together, and as Indigenous people, there's just there was no question, no doubt in my mind when Tara reached out to me. She was the moderator, or the kind of organizer of our several sessions, and I'm like, Indigenous, you know, the fact there was all Indigenous women there, pretty much Indigenous women, like I'm there, like that's my safe space. Those are my people. They see me, they hear me, they know our fight. It's a collective fight. And today, for the Indigenous community, it's number one, hands down, Indigenous women and femmes, queer community are leading the change. And so again, that's, I would say, healing, and I don't know, it's a little bit fuzzy, but that wraps up my session.
I was not here this morning because I had a previous meeting, and so I got here about 11:30. But I guess one of the things I want to say is that, number one, I think it's great that you're doing this, that you're bringing people together, and by your being here, you're really committed to making a change and to making things work. So I just think that's commendable. But the other thing I got to thinking is, if every one of you in this room could bring one young person with you, just to hear the panels, just one, it would double the size. But more than that, you're mentoring them. It's like an internship. But you know, we've got to bring all these young people along. And I know Polly Baca, who I'm very proud of. She's one of my best friends. She was the first Latina state senator in this state. And they need to make a movie about her. Because she was also the first woman to ever give a keynote speech at a Democratic convention. I mean, she's done a lot of firsts. I adore her. And I, you know, and that's what it's about. It's lifting each other up. You know, I don't have an agenda. I don't need an agenda anymore. I've been through my career, and I've been very blessed. But what I want to say is, maybe next time you do this, tell everyone, maybe bring one or two young people with you that want to be in your industry. And that's how you create great momentum, and I think a great passion to really make change. Because every one of you in this room is a change agent. And you want to do good things because your heart's in the right place. But let's do it together.
Thank you. I just want to remind you that if you want to ask questions, because I think we're about 20 minutes or so away, just go ahead and use that technology to do so, and it will come to me. And I have one, but I'm going to save that one because I have that same one on my list. So because we're running up against time, let's do this one in a little bit more quickly. The recommendations, as I said, are on the table, and the preliminary recommendations for our API and Indigenous Voices groups are listed there too. Those are still a work in progress. We're refining those. Can each of you, though, speak to one recommendation that really resonates with you, that means a lot to you, and briefly tell us why?
I love how she said briefly. Briefly, y'all, okay?
Briefly, y'all.
So I would say for me, and after looking at this, I was like, oh, we did not include anything about the youth, right? So I'm going to throw that into this one, but dedicate more resources to reporting that uncovers, examines, and provides solutions for issues that disproportionately impact Black Coloradans. So I think that one, the youth will fall under that, right? I know that there's a lot happening right now with youth in different communities and in the media. So really figuring out a way to get stuff out there that's constructive, different programs, different organizations that work with teens, so that they can go to this and find these resources, which in media, in journalism, on the news, et cetera, and so forth.
I'm going to kind of roll in a couple of mine. One I'll touch on is improving access to information. And then the second one is creating and supporting Indigenous-led news organizations and content, which kind of tied to another one of ours about funding. So it's, you know, I'm a member of the Native American Journalists Association, and I kind of gave them a shout out earlier in my session on the first panel I was in today, because they're such an excellent resource. They have a resources tab on their website, and the reason why I mentioned that is because earlier, about 10 minutes ago, I mentioned how it would, you know, I'm speaking from a journalist and a writer when I say that many times I step into spaces in whether it's a newsroom or media, and I'm often it's easy to end up in a situation that we call invisible work. I have to vet people. I'm also having to educate about Indigenous history and issues. And I sometimes end up becoming the liaison between these communities. So I'm just doing this invisible work, and it's exhausting and it's not sustainable, and this happens all too often. So I feel like the greater media and this ecosystem of storytellers, no matter what part you play in it, it's important to bring in training and education, whether it's yourself or for your group. And I feel like this does directly contribute to access to information and resources to educate yourselves on when you go to a community, like what kind of treaties were there in the past. And I think the number one thing that will always come up with Indigenous people is land. I often say that I am the land. We are the land as Indigenous people. That's how much it's a part of us. So there's not one place in the United States that is untouched by colonization and the impact that it is continuing and ongoing with our communities. And so that's going to be a theme that comes up a lot, because as a writer, I've had editors come back to me and say, you use the word land too much. It's too much. You use it everywhere. I was like, there's only so many ways I can say it. You know, that's how much it means to us. And so the land and the history and the federal Indian law in our country, and that's what I try to reiterate as a woman of color who speaks as under that umbrella as a woman of color, is I have two citizenships. I'm a citizen of my own nation, and I'm a citizen also of as a U.S. citizen. And so there is that long history of understanding the political status that Indigenous people hold in this country. And you'll hear this term of nation-to-nation relationships. And it's important, and I feel like our own government doesn't respect this as towards Indigenous people, that we're only seen as a racialized group, and that's far from it, because we're constantly having to speak past and say it's not just representation. Like, there's a reason why you'll see a lot of current contemporary issues of Indigenous issues tied to our political and legal status as nations or citizens of whatever you're representing. In my case, I speak as a Navajo, member of the Navajo Nation. So that's one thing I would say, just to kind of keep an open mind when you are hearing pitches or stories, to really broaden. And we always say, like, we need to get away from that non-traditional way of how journalism is thought of and taught, because we have to remember, and I close my eyes often to think of like how my ancestors were here hundreds of years ago, and like the systems that were created that impact Native communities today were systems created by the colonial and white cis men, and that's a fact, and it wasn't created for us and to benefit us. And so it's important for me, as we talk about equity, that we remember that there's kind of a two-pronged, how I see it, as a two-pronged approach that meet in the middle. There's this need to address it in a systemic systematic way, a systemic approach, because these system and institutions absolutely affect how we story and consume news and media. And on the other side, there's that grassroots community approach as well, because in my last session I attended, there was a discussion about monetization and capitalism, this capitalist society, and how, can we strike a balance between, this, I guess, selling stories, and if you think, and I looked at one of my Indigenous counterparts previously in the last session, because it's like, we never win. Our country we were never set to, quote, win or succeed, and we weren't set up for that success. And so it's important that we see that the idea of storytelling, for whether it's you're engaging youth or the spectrum of age across the lifetime, that the youth, they need to be seen as storytellers. Like I mentioned
Renee,
before.
I'm sorry, Renee.
Sorry.
No, but what, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to say something, because you're reminding me of something.
Yep.
When you all look at those recommendations on that sheet and the way in which we tried to synthesize Renee and Tiya so far, I just want you to think about this. Like, I really can't ask a question about a recommendation that resonates, because it resonates. And so those recommendations, those words on that paper right there, they come from here, but they come from here. And so the conversations that we're having, Renee is giving you a sense of what the conversations were like. And so it is a journey to get from here and here to there. And so I am going to have to move on, Renee,
Yeah,
but I just thank you for your
yeah,
words.
I think what
there.
you're hearing is a lot from here, because you already have this,
Yeah.
And it's important to know how these words, got here. So
Thank you.
Thank you. As I look at this list, there are two of them that I think resonate best with my community, and one of them is definitely representation matters in the newsroom, in the newspaper, editorial, management, administrative. I don't see, our community is so diverse, over 40 different ethnic communities. And when people think AAPI, they maybe just think one ethnic community, but there's Native Hawaiian, there is Filipino, there are different stages of refugees and immigrants. And all of those stories can be told, but all of those stories can also be told by diversity in your in media. The big thing now is, wow, you can look out there and maybe see 3 of mine. Representation does matter. So talking about the youth and getting them into the field is extremely important. The other piece that I just wanted to talk about is the established longstanding connections. I know that journalism is fluid. It depends on who's there and the connections that they make, and those connections don't necessarily go on to the next person who takes their place. We have seen many newscasters on the news, TV news, that are great with the community, and then they're gone, and then we don't have anybody to come and tell our stories again. So establishing those connections with our community, and again, that I understand why that's difficult and why you may not feel comfortable doing that, because there's levels of acculturation, there's different languages, there's levels of when they came here, so there's so much in there. So I'm really pushing just make those connections. There are the few of us that were on this Voices committee and our cohort. We are happy to make those connections for you so that it is sustainable. And that's something that I think one of the reasons that we're doing this is so that our stories can continue to be told.
It's hard to follow the 3 of them. My God, it's so bright. I wrote something down that every one of you in this room is really an educator. And can you imagine what a star you could be, or a champion you could be, that all of your articles that you write or what you see on TV is about, 1 week you pick African Americans, 1 week it's Native Americans and Asians and Hispanics and different groups, instead of the same old stuff. Look at the variety that you've got. I mean, listen to these 3 women. We all have stories. We all have great stories, not only culturally, but how we've lived our lives, and we all learn from each other. And we're basically, those of you who are in media, you're teachers to society. And so it betters the community. And that's what you do, is you make it better for everyone. And I really, I just believe that, if we come together and you look at the resources, like the 4 of us, because I have a great database of people, because I traveled all over the state in 64 counties, because I worked for the governor, and then I was a director of the U.S. Small Business Administration for Colorado. And I had to get out in the community. I had to meet people. I needed to meet people who were, starting a small business or had a small business. And because that's what my job was as a federal employee. And that was important to me, that I got out there and told people what we do to help them. And there's so many stories you can write about resources for all of our communities. And we don't know the resources that people have. I was telling Polly, we were sitting there, she's, Patricia, bring this up. Maybe this is a good time to bring it up. But I was a director of the Citizen Advocate Office in the governor's office, and we got every complaint. I mean, people would call us when it was snowing to tell the governor to stop it snowing. I mean, or come and get the raccoon out of my fireplace. I mean, stuff like that every day. So what we did, there's 27 agencies in state government. We put a book, myself and a person from each agency, each state agency, we met every month. We put a booklet together on what the Department of Revenue does, what the Department of Local Affairs does, and bullet pointed it, because people don't want to read paragraphs, right? And I got to tell you, it became one of the best resources the state ever had, because all we had to do is take that notebook. It was all 27 agencies in that notebook. People would pick it up and say, oh, I'm having trouble with my taxes, or I need information on this or this. So it's really about resources, and our communities don't get them. We don't get what's going on. I mean, you could even do a column in your newspaper or newsletter and write down, here's who you call for this, this, and this. People would admire that. It would help all of us. So maybe that'll help a little bit.
Thank you. No, this is good. Okay, I think we are actually past time, aren't we? So I'm sorry, but I have to ask this question. So let's actually really, this is a hard one, because this whole project, this whole initiative started in a time of urgency. Urgency is really hard to sustain. It's just that it requires a kind of energy and investment that's just hard to sustain. So my question is either, whichever one you want to answer, is really how do we maintain the sense of urgency that is necessary to keep us from slipping back into the status quo, and that or the related, what do you see as next steps?
I know that for our community, our next steps that we're looking for is to find somebody with the capacity to keep this going for us. Okay. We're doing this kind of as volunteers, but we need 1 or 2 people to keep this going, to actually be representative to the media and or vice versa.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just say one word: accountability.
Thank you.
Do you want to say anything?
I agree. We do need to keep it going, but it's more than that. Once we take those actions, we need a place that, how has it affected people? In other words, like an annual report. Mm-hmm. Such and such news media did this, and this is what happened. We need to see. It's like a report card. Great. And I think that would really remind all of us that we have an action that we have to meet, and let's not drop it. But come up with what are the success stories.
Thank you.
I would say to maintain a sense of urgency, keep looking at the news. Keep looking at media and what's happening is not what should be happening necessarily. So paying attention to what's happening.
Thank you all very, very much. Thank you for being such great listeners and for giving us more of your time. And yeah, I kept you too long. So thank you very much.